Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Storytime with Kate Meszaros. Today, I'm going to be sharing a wonderful storybook you may have already heard from your parents or maybe even your teachers. It's called The Other Side by Jacqueline Woodson, illustrations by E.B. Lewis. This book is, I believe, 23 years old. So it came out over 20 years ago, but it's been a timeless classic story of two young girls who form an uncommon friendship for the time in which they lived. Back when I was a baby and a very small child, there was such a thing as what's called segregation. And in the United States of America, there were places in this country where Black people and white people were separated by laws. And they had separate bathrooms, separate drinking fountains, separate schools. And the children were taught at that time that they were not allowed to cross those boundary lines. So, this is a wonderful story that talks about how one child realized that those boundary lines are quite silly. So, we're going to see how these two girls became friends in a very uncommon way. So, I'm going to read for you The Other Side by Jacqueline Woodson, illustrations by E.B. Lewis. I hope you enjoy this book. I certainly did. I just recently discovered it, so I was very thrilled to find it so I could share it with you on our channel. This is called The Other Side. If you check this book up from the library, I'm not going to take the time to read the author's note, but I highly recommend that you check this out because Jacqueline Woodson talks about when she wrote this novel or this storybook for kids and what her intention was. Hopefully, we've come along further in the past 20 years since she wrote it. Let's read this book together. That summer, the fence that stretched through our town seemed bigger. We lived in a yellow house on one side of it, and white people lived on the other. And Mama said, "Don't climb over that fence when you play." She said it wasn't safe. That summer, there was a girl who wore a pink sweater. Each morning, she climbed up on the fence and stayed over at our and stared over at our side. Sometimes I stared back. She never sat on that fence with anybody. That girl didn't. Once, when we were jumping rope, she asked if she could play. And my friend Sandra said no without even asking the rest of us. I don't know what I would have said. Maybe yes, maybe no. What would you have said? I'm not sure what I would have said. I kind of agree with this young girl because we didn't know what was going on in the minds of people at that time. Nowadays, I would say, of course, come over and play. But back then, it was different. And people believed different things. That summer, everyone and everything on the other side of that fence seemed far away. When I asked my mama why, she said, because that's the way things have always been. Sometimes when me and Mama went into town, I saw that girl with her mama. She looked sad sometimes, that girl did. Don't stare, my mama said. It's not polite. Why do you think this girl looked sad? Can you imagine why she might be sad? Maybe she doesn't like those rules of not being able to be able to play with that girl. You see, my cat Leo came to join us. He wants to watch too. Here, sit down, Leo. You can watch. Good boy. Good girl. It rained a lot that summer. On rainy days, that girl sat on the fence in a raincoat. She let herself get all wet and acted like she didn't even care. Sometimes I saw her dancing around in puddles, splashing and laughing. I would be like that girl. I like to splash in puddles. She seems like a very independent young girl. Do you know what independent means? I mean, she can play by herself and do things by herself too. And I kind of feel like she can think for herself as well if she was asking those girls to play with her. She probably knows the rules too, but she might think that they're silly. Mama wouldn't let me go out in the rain. That's why I bought you rainy day toys, my mama said. You stay inside here where it's warm and safe and dry. But every time it rained, I looked for that girl, and I always found her somewhere near the fence. She was hoping that someday this girl will come out and play with her. Someplace in the middle of the summer, the rain stopped. When I walked outside, the grass was damp and the sun was already high up in the sky. And I stood there with my hands up in the air. I felt brave. I felt free. I got close to the fence, and that girl asked me my name. Clover, I said. My name's Annie, she said. Annie Paul. I live over yonder, she said, by where you can see the laundry. That's my blouse hanging on the line. She smiled then. She had a pretty smile. But she was finally glad that Clover decided to talk to her. And then I smiled, and we stood there looking at each other, smiling. It's nice up on this fence, Annie said. You can see all over. I ran my hand along the fence. I reached up and touched the top of it. A fence like this was made for sitting on, Annie said. She looked at me sideways. My mama says I shouldn't go on the other side, I said. My mama says the same thing, but she never said nothing about sitting on it. Neither did mine, I said. So there Annie is going to help Clover get up on the fence so they can spend time together. That summer, me and Annie sat together on that fence. And when Sandra and them looked at me funny, I just made believe I didn't care. Kind of like how Annie would get up on that fence every day. She didn't care what people thought of her. Some mornings, my mama watched us. I waited for her to tell me to get down from that fence before I break my neck or something, but she never did. I see you made a new friend, she said one morning. I nodded, and Mama smiled. That summer, me and Annie sat on that fence and watched the whole wide world around us. I think it's kind of nice that her mother didn't tell her to get off that fence. I think the mother knew that those rules about not being able to go on the other side were silly too. I'm glad she let Clover have that time with Annie. One day, Sandra and them were jumping rope near the fence, and we asked if we could play. I don't care, Sandra said. And when we jumped, Sandra and me were partners, the way we used to be. So you can see how Clover and her behavior with Annie kind of helped her friends understand that they could all be friends and play together too. That's kind of sweet. Look, even Annie's turning the rope for him. It's kind of sweet. When we were too tired to jump anymore, we sat up on the fence, all of us, in a long line. I wonder what they're thinking. That it doesn't look like they're happy and talking with each other. They're just kind of sitting there like thinking. I wonder what they're thinking about. Can you imagine what they're thinking about? You're wondering why they have to sit on the fence and not be able to play on either side. Someday somebody's going to come along and knock this old fence down, Annie said. And I nodded. Yeah, someday. And I wonder if those girls, by sitting on the fence and talking with each other and playing with each other, are slowly helping to knock that fence down. Since that time when I was in school, segregation slowly ended, and we don't have that in our country anymore. But I think in some ways, we keep ourselves separate by color, by belief, even by how much money we have. But really, at the end of the day, we're all the same because we're all human. We're all human first, and then we're other things later. So it's important to remember that when we feel like we're being separated from someone, or even when we're doing it ourselves. Just remember that everyone is human first. So until I see you next time, have a wonderful day. Bye bye.